The kind of preachers we become depends to a great extent upon our mental image of what a preacher is. According to Thomas G. Long, preachers have at least tacit images of the preacher's role, primary metaphors that not only describe the nature of the preacher, but also embrace by implication all the other crucial aspects of the preaching event. This is as true for the listener as it is for the preacher. Those who are seated before us see themselves as an audience, a self-identity that has been shaped primarily by the culture of television. Television is a medium where ideas are on the market and credence is given based on the quality of a viewer's experience. As a result, the church has opinions about how it wishes to be addressed that are as strong, perhaps even stronger, than its notions of what it wants to hear. Today's listeners are more conscious of a speaker's image than they are of a sermon's line of reasoning, strength of argument, or its biblical content. We who preach to them have also been steeped in this culture and are tempted to try and hold their attention by the power of our personalities alone. The medium affects the message. Over a quarter of a century ago, Neil Postman warned that the medium of television was changing the American religious experience. Most Americans, including preachers, have difficulty accepting the truth, if they think about it at all, that not all forms of discourse can be converted from one medium to another, Postman wrote. It is naive to suppose that something that has been expressed in one form can be expressed in another without significantly changing its meaning, texture, or value. Postman argued that the nature of television makes authentic religious experience impossible, because there is no way to consecrate the space in which a television show is experienced. Postman explained, "It is an essential condition of any traditional religious service that the space in which it is conducted must be invested with some measure of sacrality." Postman notes that ordinary space can be made sacred, but in order for that to happen, it must be dedicated space. The trouble with television is that it is viewed in a context that cannot ordinarily be transformed into sacred space. People will eat, talk, go to the bathroom, do push-ups, or any of the things they are accustomed to doing in the presence of an animated television screen, he writes. If an audience is not immersed in an aura of mystery and symbolic otherworldliness, then it is unlikely that it can call forth the state of mind required for a non-trivial religious experience. Television has had an impact on preaching as a means of delivery, but its greatest impact has been through its ability to shape audience expectations. Some urge contemporary preachers to look to this medium for role models in communicating the gospel. Thomas Long describes the casual, chatty preachers of the relaxed suburban congregation welcoming people with the perkiness of a TV weathercaster and running through the joys and concerns as if they were the recreational directions of a cruise ship, and contrasts this with what Karl Barth described as the great peril of preaching. But the ethos of television is radically opposed to the prophetic ethos of preaching. From its rating system, which enable the broadcaster to gauge the level of viewer interest, to its seemingly infinite menu of program choices that can be recorded and watched whenever one pleases, television gives the mostly false impression that the viewer is in control of the experience. The prophet's message has the opposite effect. It reminds us that God is in control and that we are accountable to Him. The prophet does not try to make us feel comfortable or worry about whether we've enjoyed the experience. His chief concern is to arrest our attention and to speak the truth. Preaching also has a priestly dimension. The prophetic nature of preaching gives us authority to make demands of the listener. The priestly nature of preaching obligates us to make demands of the text. In the sermon, we give voice to the silent questions that plague our listeners. However, priestly advocacy in the sermon should not be confused with trite slogans, pat answers, or simplistic explanations. Priestly advocacy in preaching means that we will not be afraid to faithfully portray the rough edges of the biblical text. The world in which the text was given was a world like our own, a world whose heroes were more likely to be thugs than theologians. This was a world populated by people with troubled marriages and rebellious children. These were men and women who found it hard to take God at His word and seemed to have a gift for making the wrong choice. People who laughed and wept and sometimes got mad enough to kill. People who were, as James 5:17 puts it, just like us. Preaching is an exercise in inflection. This involves more than pitch, volume, and tone. In the sermon, the preacher makes God's written word incarnate by speaking the biblical author's words into the contemporary context. This is an inflection of the text itself, a responsibility which places a dual obligation upon the preacher. One dimension of the preacher's responsibility is to the text itself. The preacher's aim in the sermon is to animate the text without altering it. The written word has been detached from its original context, but it is not freed from it. The fact that we must speak to circumstances that the biblical writers did not originally envision does not give us the liberty to wrest the Scriptures from their original context and make them say whatever we please. Our aim in preaching is to follow in the steps of the prophets and declare God's word, to be faithful to our priestly responsibility and take our place in the midst of the people, standing between the text and the congregation and speaking as their advocate. We speak with authority when we preach, but we also speak with sympathy. We declare certainties when we preach, but we also preside over mysteries. In preaching, we seek to mediate the presence of Christ, and by our words we hope to kindle a flame on the altar of the heart.